Hey, how you all doing? I'm Leo, and I spent 8 years in prison right after I was born. But you're probably wondering how I committed crime the moment my mother gave birth to me. Well, let me explain how it all went down. It began with my mom being pregnant with me. She lived in an apartment with my dad, and we were incredibly broke. My dad was an angry man who hated everything. He always felt like everything he did was wrong, and it could never make anyone happy. He was also currently looking for a good job to help raise me. My mom was 3 months pregnant and she stayed indoors all day while Dad tried to earn money for us. Each day he got more and more stressed and couldn't handle it anymore. He did something that would change our whole family's life, mine specifically. He told Mom that he needed her help robbing a small store not too far from where we lived. Obviously, Mom refused immediately, but Dad started persuading her by saying we were desperate and they needed me to live a good life. Well, that didn't turn out right, did it? Finally, my mom caved in and agreed to help him. And here's how the plan went down. Mom would walk in first late at night and ask for something on a high shelf. While the cashier was doing that, Dad would sneak in and rob the register, then walk out like nothing happened. Seemed foolproof, right? Apparently not, because here's what happened next. I guess they were robbing the most advanced cashier box ever, because soon as Dad started attempting to open it, the whole store alarm went off, and before you know it, things started getting heated in the room. My dad yelled, "Run!" to my mom, but the cashier must have also been Usain Bolt's cousin, because he came speeding to Dad and grabbed him and wouldn't let him go. Within a few seconds, Mom had creeped up behind the cashier and smashed his head with a wine glass. The poor guy was out cold, but there was nothing my parents could do. They zoomed out the door and made it back to the apartment safely, or so they thought. Around 4 a.m. there was a loud knocking on the door. It was the cops. 24 hours went by and a lot happened in those 24 hours. My parents were arrested under suspicion of robbery and attempted murder, and they both got sent to separate prisons for 10 years while I was still in my mother's womb. Unfortunately, being pregnant doesn't give you a get-out-of-jail-free card, so my mom spent the next 6 months in prison alone until I came along, which was quite the drama. It was a regular old day until the guards hear screaming from down the hall where my mother was. She was giving birth already? The doctor said it would be another 1 to 2 weeks before I was born, but I'm guessing they didn't get their facts right because there was my mom in her cell begging for help. The two guards that were there were clueless on what to do. Then one of them tried to help with the pain Mom was receiving while the other called for a doctor. My mom let out a horrendous scream and there was dead silence until the sound of a baby crying broke it. I was now in a prison with my mom just waiting for something to happen. The guards had said that I could be transferred to a relative or put up for adoption. Well, that was a fail because my mom only had her grandma who was living in Spain and she refused to leave me anyway. So the guards shrugged and said I'd just have to stay with my mom until she changed her mind or got out. But wait a moment, that means I had to stay a decade in prison that was for females? Shouldn't that be illegal? Well, apparently not. 2 years went by, and let's just say it could have been worse because people knew that a woman had her 2-year-old son in prison with her and they were talking about it a lot. The only people looking after me was my mom and these two very kind ladies who tried to teach me things that other kids would learn in school. I, of course, have no memory of this, but I'll just believe it for now. The one thing I do remember them saying is to keep calm and carry on. 3 years went by and I started to notice something was up. "How come I'm the only boy here?" I asked my mom, and she looked crumbled, for she knew this question would come one day, just not so early. I'm a fast learner, I've been told, so it was no surprise I would let curiosity get the better of me. When Mom told me the story of why we're here, I became upset and confused, but I was still very young, so I didn't know that much. 2 years went by again, and now I was 7, and things weren't looking good for me. I was now fully aware of my different appearance to everyone else, and not just age, I mean, and started feeling uncomfortable and unsafe. Lots of these women shot me dirty looks when they could, and I could swear some of them tried to grab me sometimes. So for the most part I stuck with my mother most of the time, who, thankfully, still loved me the same as when she saw me. I also started asking her and her friends thousands of questions like, what does a boy look like aside from me? And how do you get taller? And is there any other type of food in the world beside mushed peas and hard bread? All of these questions were answered, and I got much more intelligent by the minute, and had accepted that lives in prison were normal. But then something happened to me that wasn't normal at all. It was about 6 months later when one day after finishing my lunch, I walked back to the cell with my mom, for I had memorized where I needed to go off by heart. Then, in a flash, these three scary-looking ladies grabbed me and pulled me to the showers. Now I was frightened, of course, but I didn't know how to react since I didn't know what was happening at that moment. And then I saw them three tumbling over me with an unsettling grin in their faces. One of them was a large black woman who was the scariest of all, since she looked like she could step on me and kill me. And the other two were blonde-haired women who were skinny but tough-looking. They started doing things, sexual things, and I was petrified. A few minutes later, a guard found them snooping around near the corner of the shower room and escorted them to the office. I don't know what happened to them, but I'm sure they regretted it. I was told to go back to my cell, and I did so. My mother was crying in fear and guilt after I told her what had happened in the shower room with those three women, and she realized that this was no place for a child to grow up in. And then she told me she would get me out of this place and have me live in the outside world with a temporary family who would look after me until she was set free. I didn't know how to respond since I've never been to the outside world before, but I saw that it's what my mom wanted, so I went along with it. Within a week, I said my final goodbyes to my mom, and I had been transferred to a family with a husband and a wife who were called Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, and one other kid named Tim who was only 8 months older than me. This was the first time I'd ever seen anyone even close to my age, so it was exciting. We became good friends and I developed a relationship with the Andersons, but I still missed my mom deep down and had formed a new question in my head. Where, how, and who is my dad? I saw my mom every month in prison and told her how I was doing and asked her how much longer she was going to be in jail. She told me less and less months each time, and I got more enthusiastic about it every month. But for now, she just said to experience life and always be happy, and that's exactly what I did. March 10th, 2015, my mom was released from prison. I'll never forget the moment she walked out of the gates and we ran to each other under the glistening sun and hugged for 15 minutes. It was a moment that will remain permanently in my mind. A lot of stuff happened since that day. I had to wait a bit before Mom could rent a nice apartment for us to stay in and get a decent job that paid well. I said goodbye to my temporary family and promised to keep in touch, especially to Tim, for he is now my best friend. I can finally say to you all that I am now 14 and living a good and healthy life with my mother in Florida. We had heard that my dad had almost got a guy killed in the prison he was in, and he then got an extended 2 years in jail. But that's the least of our problems. Maybe I'll meet him one day and see how he's doing, but for now, I'll keep calm and carry on.